This second panel is going to focus on innovation in the water sector, or as some would argue, the lack of it, and why. We have an exceptional group of panelists for purposes of discussing this, and I just want to introduce them. To my immediate left, Taman Pechet, who's the founder of Banyan Water, who's the chairman of Imagine H2O, and who has a very rich history, as you can see in your materials, as an investor. To his left, Michael Marcus, who is the general manager of the Orange County Water District, and has enormous experience in construction management and water planning and elements of this whole debate from that perspective. And to his left, Peter Yoles, who leads Water Smart's public affairs activities, and previously was responsible for protecting water resources at the Nature Conservancy. And then Buzz Thompson, who together with Nusha Ajami and David Victor wrote a terrific paper for this event. I hope you've all had a chance to look at it. Buzz wears so many hats I can't count them, but he's a professor at Stanford Law School. He's also a director of the Woods Institute. And we're going to begin with Buzz summarizing his paper, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Buzz.
Okay, thank you, Roger. As you just heard, I'm actually a lawyer by background, so I'm going to do something which is really unusual for a lawyer to do, which is I'm going to spend the next 7 minutes talking entirely about technology. Thankfully, on this particular paper, I had two co-authors, Nusha Ajami, who is sitting in the second row over here, and David Victor from the University of California at San Diego, who know far more about the technologies than I do. As Secretary Rubin started out by mentioning, water is, I think, going to be the critical issue of the 21st century, certainly the critical resource issue. And one of the most important things we're going to have to learn how to do is to get along with less. Because you're going to hear in the next panel, there are vast areas of the world, including California, which are going to have less water available to them in a period of climate change than they have today. And technology is going to be one of the crucial elements in solving that oncoming, increasing water shortage. One of the things that the last panel talked about in terms of dealing with water shortages is reducing our consumption. And in fact, there's really only three ways in which we can learn to do with less. One is that we can lower the population. That was something that Rob Glennon mentioned we really don't talk very much about. The second thing we can do is we can reduce the amount of water we utilize. We can conserve water. But then the third thing we can do is that we can turn to technology. And technology is going to be critical in solving the water challenges that we have in this particular century. Water technology is going to be essential for the type of water trading activity that Rob Glennon talked about in his paper. The Westlands Water District, which is in the Central Valley of California, has turned to technology and electronics trading system in order to make sure that their internal water market works as effectively as possible. Technology is going to be important in the type of groundwater management, which is going to be critical under California's new legislation. There are engineers here at Stanford who are working on new technologies that effectively can do CAT scans of the earth, and in the process have a much better sense of what that groundwater resource is that we need to manage. As you heard in the last panel, technology is important to measure water. Technology is also critical for conserving water. Governor Brown mentioned that's the #1 goal of the state water plan. And without new technologies, we're not going to be able to conserve as much as we could. And let me give you two further examples of how technology is important, both of them in terms of new sources of water, technologies that can both help us reduce our demand for fresh water at the same time that we reduce our demand for energy. One of those technologies is in the area of recycling. Historically, the way in which we dealt with water was that we imported water great distances to where we needed it. We utilized that water, and then we dumped it back into the environment again, frequently in California in the ocean where it was not usable. And in having to treat and then dispose of that wastewater, we have used immense amount of energy. As a general matter, about 30 to 60% of the energy demand of most municipalities is for their wastewater treatment systems. About 3% of all the energy used throughout the United States is for the treatment and then disposal of wastewater. We need to change that. Through recycling, we're already beginning to take that wastewater and recycle it in order to get the clean water back that we can utilize again. But what we have to be doing is recycling that wastewater not simply for the water, but also for the energy that is contained in it. No matter how much energy we have to use in order to purify wastewater, there is 4 times that amount of energy embedded in the wastewater itself. And so at least in theory, we can produce 4 times the energy that's actually necessary in order to purify that water for reuse. The screen at the moment shows some technology which has been developed here at Stanford, the CANDO technology. The CANDO technology will be one of the first technologies that actually will produce more energy than it utilizes, so that not only will it purify water and provide us with more water that we can use rather than fresh water from rivers and streams, but also supply us with energy back to the grid. Another major area in which we can produce more water in the future for our needs is desalination. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner here the desalination plant that San Diego is building in Carlsbad. Desalination at the moment is not the answer for water shortages in very many regions of California and the world, simply because of its cost. Desal costs on average something in the nature of about $2,000 an acre foot right now, where you can frequently get water through other means for about $500 an acre foot. And desalinated water is very expensive for several reasons. One of the reasons, though, is that it requires an immense amount of energy. Almost half of the operating cost of your typical desalination plant is energy. In addition to the cost of operating the desal plants are huge operations, as again you can see in that upper right-hand corner. In order to be able to put the amount of water through those desal plants that we need, we generally have to have very sizable plants with huge footprints in probably the worst possible place to put a huge plant, which is on, for example, the coast of California. And so not only do you have huge energy costs, but you also have huge construction costs. The question is whether or not we can further reduce the cost of desalination, and there are new technologies on the verge of adoption that should permit us to reduce the cost of desal. The picture on the lower left-hand corner is a representation of graphene. Graphene was first developed and produced in 2003. It is a form of pure carbon in a very thin layer. So graphene, in fact, is so thin, it's basically two-dimensional. But even though it's extremely thin, it's also extremely strong. And so graphene opens up the opportunity of being able to get a lot more water through the filter system, and doing that at high volumes, because again, it's very thin, so it's easy to get water through it, but it's very strong, so you can get a lot of water through it. There was a recent MIT study that suggests that we could probably reduce the total amount of energy that's needed for desal plants by about 15% by moving over to graphene. And perhaps even more importantly, we can actually reduce the size of desalination plants by about a half. We'd only need about half as many pressure vessels because of how much water we can actually move through the graphene membranes. And that would permit us, again, to significantly reduce the cost of desalination. The problem, however, is that we are investing an inadequate amount of money right now in these types of water innovations. And as a result of that, we're getting much less in the way of new, innovative water technology than we really need. This is a slide that shows the number of new patents issued in every year from 1999 until 2011. First of all, in the water sector, which you see in the bottom green, and second of all, in the clean energy sector, which you'll see in the upper blue. Early in 1999, you had about twice as many patents which were issued in the energy sector than in the water sector. But as you can see, that gap has grown dramatically, so that earlier in this particular decade, there was a 7-fold difference. Even today, there is a 4-fold difference in the amount of new technologies being produced in water versus being produced in energy. And no matter how you measure innovation in the water field versus innovation in the energy field, whether you measure it in terms of the output, the number of new patents being issued, or whether you measure it in terms of the amount of money that we are investing in the water technology, in terms of either the total investment, the number of new deals in the water sector, venture capital investment, corporate investment, public funding, water technology is getting only a fraction of the money that new energy technology is receiving. So the question that this particular paper addresses is, what could we do about that? And if you read the paper, you'll see that we have an analysis which shows there's a variety of reasons why new technologies in the water field are coming at a much slower pace than they are in the energy area. But I want to talk about the 4 major areas that we focus on in the paper. The first one is pricing. Water prices are far lower than they are for virtually any other comparable resource. And as a result, the demand for new water technologies is much less than it actually should be. This particular slide here shows the effect of energy prices on new patents in the energy field. And what you'll see is that there's a very high correlation between how much we are charging for energy and how many new patents are being developed in the energy area. It's also not surprising that the 2 states with the highest energy prices, which are Hawaii and California, have been 2 of the leaders in producing new energy technology. But if you look at water, and this particular slide shows the United States as a whole, the vertical axis on this particular slide shows the price that we charge for water. The horizontal axis shows the amount of water which we are distributing. The United States is providing water at one of the cheapest rates of any of the major developed countries around the world. And so one of our recommendations is that we should actually begin charging for water the true price of water. And if we do that, that will increase the demand for the types of new water technologies that we need. And there's a variety of reasons why, right now, why water is underpriced. The first thing is we actually give away water in the United States. We all pay for water, but what we actually pay for is the cost of transporting the water to us and then purifying and delivering the water for us. Neither California nor any of the other states actually charge us for the water itself, despite the fact that there is an opportunity cost to the environment, to aesthetics, to recreation of taking that water out of our rivers and streams. There was a study in Australia 2 years ago that tried to look at what the value of the water in the river was compared to just supplying it to people. And what they found was that the value of keeping the water in the streams was about 3 times the actual price that we were charging for the water. So the first thing we should actually do is start charging for the water itself. Second of all, there are some areas of California, many areas of the United States as a whole, that still don't meter water. So we're actually not charged by the amount of water that we use. Third, there are a lot of utilities in the United States that are not setting aside the money that's necessary for actually reinvesting in the infrastructure that they have and that is deteriorating over time. Fourth, water prices in much of the United States are subsidized. So there are some states, for example, that still subsidize their water prices with real estate taxes. Fifth, when we are faced with water scarcity, we don't adjust the price of our water to reflect that particular scarcity. I don't think there is any other resource that when it becomes scarcer, the price of that resource actually doesn't rise. So there are a variety of ways in which we underprice water. And if we simply priced it at what its true value was, we would take a major step towards actually providing an incentive for the type of new water technologies that I was mentioning earlier. Another area is financing. In order to move these new technological improvements out, we not only have to price water properly, but we also have to finance it. And water is an area which is highly capital intensive. This particular slide shows the actual amount of capital invested in water compared to prices. But we don't have adequate mechanisms at the moment to actually provide for adequate financing for this investment. So another thing that we propose is a public benefit charge that would be charged on water usage, and that would then go into a fund that could be used for a variety of purposes, but including new R&D. A third area is the area of regulations. Regulations can both serve as a driver of new technology. So, for example, the Clean Water Act actually drove the development of new water quality technology. The type of renewable portfolio standard that we have in the energy area in California here has driven new energy technology. But regulations can also serve as an obstacle to new technology. And one of the things that we have found in our particular study is that regulations in the water field are providing too much obstruction to new technologies and too little incentive for new water technologies. And then our final recommendation is that a number of states, including, we believe, California, should consider opening state offices of water resource innovation and development. These offices that could be based in an existing water agency like the California Department of Water Resources could have the responsibility for ensuring adequate prices of water, adequate finances, proper regulation. But then in addition to that, it could also serve as a common test bed for new technologies, and it could then take the information about new technologies and ensure that those actually get out to the water utilities. So those are just 4 of our recommendations in this particular area, and I look forward to hearing from the panelists as to their ideas for moving new technologies out.
Thank you, Buzz. That was great. So, Tammin, I'm going to start with you. The core focus of the first panel and the core focus of Buzz's presentation just now was the importance of introducing market-based mechanisms, especially pricing, into the water sector. And 2 of the 3 recommendations which Buzz's paper makes involve raising prices. So I want to drill down a little bit on that in 2 ways. One, do we need to raise prices primarily to finance upgrades in our aging water infrastructure, or do we need primarily to raise prices to, in effect, offer returns or attractive enough returns to investment returns to induce innovation? Exactly what is the core reason we need to raise prices? And secondly, how hard is it really to do that? You know, when you start off and begin to be introduced to this whole subject without knowing a lot about it, you have this image that the biggest reason you can't raise water prices is because households don't want their monthly water bills to go up. Pretty natural, not too unlike the difficulty in raising gas taxes at the federal level. But then you learn that the vast majority of water is used for agriculture. And I don't know whether that means that's why it's especially hard to raise prices, or whether actually it would be easier to do that, or is easier to do that than if households were the primary consumer. So talk about that a bit.
Sure, that's simple. So let's start with where we are with water prices. How many people know what they paid last month for water and sewer? How many people think whatever you pay now, it's going up? Okay. Well, one of the issues is that there is no average price for water or sewer that is relevant to an innovative company trying to sell to a customer. The only price that matters is what that customer pays. because you have to deliver a value proposition against the price of water. I agree, water rates are rising. They're rising faster. Water and sewer rates are rising faster than any other utility expense. But part of the reason why not very many hands went up for the first question is because they're still low as a percentage of median household incomes. So there is room to raise rates. Rates are rising, but they're still low. So why do we need to raise them? Well, again, you have to realize that water is a hyper-local market. And I think that on average, water and sewer rates need to increase, but actually, some places they're quite expensive. And for some customers, they're actually quite expensive. And so it's really a data problem of figuring out if you want more innovation to reach customers, what customers need higher prices in order to adopt innovation. It's not a universal answer. It is true on average, though, higher prices will lead to a broader adoption of innovation. And I think that the underlying question is, how many of you think that in the current construct, with prices the way that they are, that innovation in the water sector is a good business opportunity? Raise your hand if you think that that makes sense. So you're dealing right now with over a $600 billion industry globally for water and sewer products and services, receiving about $200 million in innovation investment in the form of venture capital and angel investment. There are a number of reasons for that. Water is certainly one of them. If we want to promote more investment, we will need to raise prices. But this is a huge market, as is right now, with lots of opportunity and not a lot of competitive financing and not a lot of competitive entrepreneurial initiatives to bring innovation to the market. So even if in its current construct, this is a really good opportunity, which should only improve as water and wastewater rates rise. The primary reason to do that is to create better behavior around water management and to promote more innovation so that we have a more sustainable water future. The difficulty of that, I thought that Buzz raised a number of issues behind the difficulty of raising water and sewer rates, but I'd just say from my own personal experience, I've had a chance to meet with quite a few state and local representatives about water and sewer rates. And behind the scenes, they all universally would like to increase those rates or to better structure them, to increase the marginal cost of a gallon of water. They just would like someone else to blame. And one real opportunity is giving someone else to blame as a scapegoat so that at a local level where prices are really set, politicians have an easier time doing that.
Maybe you could go back and tell them to blame the Hamilton Project. Michael, let me follow up an aspect of that. Much is made in the materials for today's forum on the underinvestment in water and the aging of the water infrastructure, the degree to which, from memory, 7 billion gallons a day, I think, in this country are lost, essentially for reasons of leaks. But at the same time, there are some cities and metropolitan areas right now that are engaged in very expensive multi-year water and sewer system upgrades. So I know Chicago, about a year ago, passed or the city council at the mayor's initiation, passed a 28% 5-year increase in water rates, or water and sewer rates, and that's being used to finance a $4.5 billion multi-year upgrade. And I believe San Francisco is doing something similar, and there are other places I've also heard about. So my question is, how much of that is going on around the country, the old-fashioned way, in terms of raising prices, with the public being, very aware of what the purpose is, and are we doing a lot of that actually, despite the impression that I must say some of these materials give, or aren't we?
Well, I think it's kind of hit and miss, and it does depend on the regions. And I also believe one thing that we do as a water community, a very poor job, is educating people as to where their water comes from. We turn on the tap and the water always comes out, and we just expect it to come out. And I think as water agencies also, we maybe don't try to make the case for investment. I think if we're a little smarter about our approach to things, and we can make the case for investment, if we can identify what those needs are, and then present those to our elected officials, it'll make it easier for them then to make the decision as to whether to raise rates or not. I know in Orange County, there's several cities that for the past 5 years, the city councils just have said, no, we're not going to raise the rates, and for no real good reason. And part of that also, I think, from the water agency's perspective, if you can make the case, you should talk and bring it to the people, not be afraid to address your constituents that you serve, and have meetings with them and try to explain to them where the water comes from, what the infrastructure is, what it takes to provide that service for them, and then build the case. And once you're able to do that, then I think most of the time you'll be able to proceed along with being able to raise the rates that you need to build the project. I can speak from experience on this. Our agency built a $500 million recycled water plant. And at the time, and this was in the early 2000s when we were planning the job, the cost of that water was going to be more than the cost of imported water from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We had to make the case that we needed that water supply reliability in building that project, and our board went forward with the project. We built it. It's the world's largest indirect potable reuse project, produces 72,000 acre-feet of water per year. And that's a significant chunk of water. And in fact, we didn't even have to make the case the last time. The board decided right after we went online in January 2008 to expand the facility from 70 million gallons to 100 million gallons. So in February of this year, we'll be producing over 100,000 acre-feet of water. A recycled water that gives us the local water supply reliability.
Let me just follow that up for one more second.
Yeah.
You know, one might say that historically in this country, or at least modern times, the electric utility sector has been, generally speaking, albeit sometimes in fits and starts and more slowly than they'd like, able to raise rates and or pass on the costs as necessary. And for example, 30 years ago in this country, or a little before that, when nuclear power was coming on stream and the costs of nuclear power plants were so huge as they are, the utilities that were building them were able to pass those costs on in terms of rate increases or rate adjustments. So why has that sector been, in general, able to do that, especially in revolving giant construction projects, and the water sector has had such a great deal more difficulty?
I think probably because most people can't go to that agency, whether the rate-setting agency, and express their concern. At the local level, it's very easy for someone to go up to their city council and say, hey, we don't want you to raise our water rate. And they're listened to. That's why, as I said, I think it's important for those local agencies to be able to have the knowledge to be able to express and tell the public why it is important, why it is necessary to raise those rates.
Okay. Peter, you're next. Buzz showed us that slide on the patent contrast between clean energy and water, and much of the very good paper he has, or he presented, talks about the poor innovation rate in water, and uses clean energy as the alternative. One of my reactions to that when I read it first was, well, sure, because of the ownership structure, meaning that the energy sector is largely, in fact, almost entirely privately owned. Utility sector, investor-owned, highly regulated, but lots of sectors in energy differently regulated and less regulated. And we've all seen in the past few years in the United States an enormous amount of new investment come into all kinds of energy and the unleashing of tremendous increases in output. It's really an extraordinary story. So my question is, how much does simply the ownership structure of water, with I believe 80% of the water in this country being owned by local authorities, not investors, how much does that impede innovation all by itself, right there? And are there ways to, in some form or other, liberalize the ownership of the water sector, and I hope anybody else who wants to comment on this will, in order to make some progress against that particular obstacle? Because to me, it's probably the number one obstacle.
Sure, on the innovation topic, let me speak a little bit from the role of a founder of a successful startup company and the experience that I've had, and also interacting with many municipalities. So with WaterSmart, we started in 2009, and we successfully raised over $6 million in venture capital, really to bring behavior change to consumers and water utilities to better engage their customers, really to tell them about how much water they use, how they compare to neighbors like them, and to recommend the best ways for them to save water, energy, and money. So throughout that process, we were able to map ourselves to what has become, software as a service for venture capitalists and so on. And one of the things we found is that we were actually lucky in terms of the timing when we raised that venture funding during this sort of clean tech boom, where there were about 300 deals a year occurring. Today, in the first half of 2014, only 8 water energy deals got done at the Series A level. So a lot of that venture money that helped us get started and many other companies is not there today. Now, what we do on a day-to-day is we talk with many municipalities, and we often work on sort of the marginal cost of water for water utilities. And what we do see is, as Mike talked about, challenges in raising rates. Part of that is we see that there's almost a $5 trillion backlog in deferred capital costs in the United States over the next 30 years. So yes, there is a big challenge in raising rates. One of the things that water utilities look at, though, is the marginal cost of that water supply, whereas consumers see the average cost of that water. So the incentives at the municipality are very different from what a consumer looks like at the home. So when we look at what the structure is, you're right. In the energy industry, the vast majority, 85% of the electricity is delivered through investor-owned utilities. On the water side, it's the inverse. About 85% of the water is delivered through municipally owned, publicly owned water utilities. And we come back to some of the same challenges that Mike talked about, which is the decision makers about rates are these publicly elected officials, whether it's the city council members or publicly elected board of directors of water utilities, and they're under very different incentives than the heads of these investor-owned utilities. That said, there are a lot of public subsidies that go into water. Partly that's because of the public health nature of the service that water utilities provide. They have subsidized energy costs. They have subsidized conveyance costs and storage. Many of the projects that the federal government has built over the years, those costs did not get passed on to the retail water utilities or their customers. So we're living in an era when we actually do have cheap water and cheap water supplies. So those are some of the structural challenges that we face. Whether or not we want to privatize water utilities, I would say probably not. I think the water utility industry has overall done a very good job of delivering a clean, reliable supply of water over the years, and I'm not sure we want to mess with that. But I think there are a lot of the recommendations that this paper is making, I think, are applicable, and we can try to move water industry management more towards the way that energy is managed, and I think that the paper does a fairly good job of identifying where we can do that.
Well, Buzz, let me ask you a version of the same question, which is, but I want you to challenge my premise, because I'm sure you don't agree with at least part of it. I thought the comparison between innovation and clean energy, you and I were talking about this before, and that in water was a bit of a false one because of this ownership difference. So there's a lot of investment in clean energy, for example, advanced types of solar, is occurring within 50 miles of where we're sitting right here in the technology community and the venture capital, as backed by the venture capital community. And one of the reasons for that is because if you're an investor, you have a very long runway and you have all the freedoms and the upside, as well as obviously the downside, associated with private investment. But you don't have that, generally speaking, in the water sector because of its ownership structure. So I thought that the differences, as you put them up on the slide, between the two were completely natural as a result of the ownership. Now, what's wrong with my thinking on this?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting to think about how the public sector on the one hand and private investor-owned companies on the other might differ in the way in which they deal with new investments, how they price water. I actually thought Mike's point a moment ago was really quite good. You know, for a lot of local municipalities, when they want to raise their water rates, they have to respond directly to the voter. Whereas if you have an investor-owned utility, it's responding to a public utility commission, and I actually think the public utility commissions have been much more receptive to the idea that we have to invest in new technologies, and therefore we are going to let you raise your rates in order to do that. Having said that, I ultimately have to live in a real world, and there was a lot of movement towards privatizing water utilities in the late 1990s, and it picked up a little bit of steam, and then it basically shut down. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that, but one of them is that people care about their water. They care about their water more than they care about any other utility that they're receiving, and they are suspicious of private companies and whether or not private companies are really going to engage in the type of public interested management that they want. So although I think you could make some good arguments in that direction, I don't think we are going to see movement towards more privately owned water utilities. And so then the question becomes, what can we do in order to help move the public entities towards higher prices? And I think there's several lessons there that we know. Number one is, if you educate the public, if you help the public understand why it is that you need to raise their water rates, then they frequently go along with it. And that's why you actually have seen a number of utilities that have successfully raised their water rates in the United States over the past 5 years. And then I think the other thing that we have learned is that it is better to be constantly raising your rates a little bit over time and making sure that you have enough money to invest in new innovations and replace existing infrastructure than what unfortunately a lot of local cities do, which is that they refuse to raise rates for like 10 or 15 years, and then suddenly they have to have a huge increase in their water rate, which of course gets everyone's attention.
All right, let me follow that up, and you might comment on this, but anyone else on the panel who'd like to jump in, please do. So let's assume that you referred to the costs and the energy intensity of desalination. But let's assume that there are, because even I, not a technologist, have seen evidence of this, coming breakthroughs, technologically speaking, in desalination and perhaps also in purification, which make it much more competitive. But on the other hand, the capital costs are going to be huge. So how do you see that being financed? And how much of that is what I might call the corporate community going to do? You mentioned the food and beverage sector and other aspects of the corporate community. How much are they investing? Are they a meaningful factor in this whole equation or not? And if we have those types of breakthroughs, are they going to be a major source of investment? Because we're all talking about innovation-related investment here today, or not?
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent question. And historically, we have financed new infrastructure in the water field through public bonds, where you've issued the bonds and then you have paid back the cost through revenue over time. Those are increasingly limited. A lot of local water companies are finding it more and more difficult to turn to traditional public bonds. This is an area where I think the private sector can have a major role, and that's where you actually have private-public partnerships, where the private companies actually help to construct the new desalination plants. They use some of their financing ability, and frequently they then run that entity for the public water supplier for a period of time.
Yeah, part of the problem there is it's kind of interesting because when the private agency comes in, their cost of financing is a lot more, or can be a lot more. They're looking for a 10 to 12% return on equity for that financing. And in the public sector, we actually have, and our agency is AAA. But we haven't gone out into the market in the last 5 or so years. The state has a very good program, the State Revolving Fund, the SRF program, And it offers very low-interest loans for agencies to build projects. Right now, I think there's $800 million set aside, and some of that's been subscribed to already, but it's 1% over 30 years. So it makes it easier for the public agency to finance the project and to build the project. But still, that cost of financing, we've taken advantage of at our agency in order to keep the cost of our projects down. I think the one thing the public agencies do have to do is they do have to, if they can have boards or city councils that set policies that maintain funds, reserve funds to build aging infrastructure, to replace aging infrastructure. There again, our board, I think very wisely, has set aside an R&R, refurbishment and replacement fund. And we currently have $70 million in that fund. But we're using that every year to replace our infrastructure, and as a result, we won't be caught at some point in time having to raise a lot of money to rebuild those projects. So I think if the public agencies can take a little smarter approach as to what they're doing and have there again the elected officials' support to be able to support those types of programs, that may be one of the answers in the future also.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just ask anyone on the panel who'd like to answer this. Historically, has there been any federal role in regard to these really large projects? I mean, I mentioned the nuclear power example a minute ago. Well, today there are, I think from memory, 8 to 10 new proposed nuclear power plants in various stages of approval. Approvals take many years. And these are the ones that received approval under the Department of Energy loan guarantee program because they cost not far from $20 billion a piece these days. And so the Department of Energy is actually financing a lot of these. So if we have breakthroughs in desalination or whatever it is there historically been or would there be a federal role? Or otherwise, who's going to pay for these? How are we going to build them?
I might step in there and just sort of say, well, if you just look at where is the capital coming from to do what we need from an innovation perspective in water, you can stage it. Right? You have early stage financing for high growth opportunities that are truly innovative. You have later stage financing for companies that are already developed. And you have project finance for things like you're talking about, which are projects to generate water supply or do something with wastewater to reincorporate it into the water system. For the most part, as you get later in those stages, the financial markets are pretty competitive. If you can show someone on Wall Street an attractive deal with long-term projected cash flows around a water system, there are lots of people who would like to finance that. So it's not that we're there and there's no problem there. I think that the real problem is in the earlier stages, where we have this long history of innovation in water going back to Roman aqueducts, and now we're looking at all these problems becoming increasingly acute. How do you finance anything that doesn't have very predictable, stable cash flows like a project? And there, I think, going back to your earlier question of the comparison between energy and water that Buzz drew, I think it actually is a fair thing to talk about, because a lot of the money that would finance early stage water innovation was coming from holders of money who were financing energy deals. And when some of those went south, they pulled the purse strings on water innovation. So without directly answering the question of long-term federal involvement in big projects, you can get a good project financed if it's worthy. I think it's harder to get innovation financed.
Yeah, right now I don't know whether you can rely on the federal government for anything. To be honest with you, I think we have a lot better chance at the state level to do those types of things. As the governor said, Prop 1 on the ballot would provide a considerable chunk of money to be able to build the water infrastructure that the state needs. And I don't know that we need to be totally reliant on Sacramento either. I think there's an obligation for the local agencies to build the infrastructure that they need also and to finance it.
Okay.
One other thing about the federal level, we have a Department of Energy, but we don't have a Department of Water. And we might think about that, and we have water actually fragmented across multiple agencies. The Bureau of Reclamation was represented here earlier. We have the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Defense. We have EPA. It's spread across many agencies. There's no single entity or person thinking holistically about water, and that's why we have to look to the states and local agencies for innovation, because that's where it's happening. But they're strapped with having to deal with refurbishing and renovating our water systems, and there's not much left over either in people or money to think about innovation or investing in the measurement and verification of these new technologies. They're out there, but there are not very many opportunities to go out and test them, evaluate them, and really take the risk off the table for water utility managers. They're having to provide this reliable, low-cost supply of water, which they're doing very well to do, but there's not a lot of willingness or risk-taking in the culture of agencies to do that. But we can help change that by providing other mechanisms to provide capital for early-stage investments and the measurement and verification of these new technologies to de-risk investments in these new technologies.
All right, let's turn to the audience and take some questions for the panel from the audience. I know there are microphones that, so ma'am, in the middle here.
Thank you. My name is Carol Reeb. I'm from Hopkins Marine Station down in Monterey with Stanford University. I'm a research scientist. We talk a lot about the cost of innovation, but we don't talk much about the cost of the environmental impacts of that innovation, and specifically I refer to ocean desalination. I'm a fisheries geneticist, and I have done a little bit of research on market squid, which is California's #1 fishery currently, and brine discharged onto the seafloor from desal could actually impact our #1 fishery. Much like salmon's, the seafloor is a nursery. When we diverted water from rivers, we destroyed a major commercial fishery. Desal could repeat history. And I would also say that hopefully one day on the panel there will be fisheries people up here and not just ag.
By the way, if I can point out, the most recent Hamilton Project Forum before this one was on fisheries and commercial fishing and reforms that could protect and promote commercial fishing. So we just recently covered that.
Yeah.
Who would like to take this?
No, I think there was a question in there, and the answer is yes. I mean, particularly desal has a whole variety of problems in addition to the cost, and one of them is what do you do with the salt brine after you finish desalting the water, and that is a significant problem where, again, I think that science and technology can help solve the problem by looking to see how we might be able to dispose of that in a way which is safest as possible for the fish. But you have to have the actual money there looking at how you can address that particular problem. But it is definitely a serious problem.
May I just add that salt is actually an energy generator? It's a CO2-free energy source, much like wastewater generates electricity. We could use the same with salt.
If I may add on to that about the effect of the environment, what water managers can do, efficiency is really important, right? Here in California, we actually divert the same amount of water today as we did back in 1980. That's all because we've become more productive with the water we're using, right? And so we have to continue to go along that efficiency curve and using technology. So the more we can do that, the more we can become more efficient and leave more water in our rivers, lakes, and groundwater basins.
And I think the one thing you heard in other presentations as well, and I agree with the order, conservation, recycling, desalination. We have a tremendous opportunity to continue to recycle water in the state of California. We discharge 1.3 billion gallons per day off the coast of Southern California. Don't have the number for Northern California. But so there is that opportunity. And I think we talk about technology. We're trying to develop technologies to go beyond indirect potable reuse and into something called direct potable reuse, where we would have these advanced treatment facilities that take wastewater, treat it to distilled water quality, and then put it into a pipeline upstream of a water treatment plant. Tremendous opportunity there. In fact, there's a bill that was passed a few years ago, SB 918, Senator Pavley, that says that I guess it's now the Department of Drinking Water, has to establish a framework for direct potable reuse by the end of 2016. So that's something the governor will be able to do in his next term.
Which one of his next terms? Who's next? Yes, sir.
Peter Williams from IBM. One of the themes that I've not heard, just to compare my native country, the UK, there's 24 water companies for 70 million people. In the United States, there are 55,000 separate water systems for 350 million people. 30,000 of those have fewer than 500 customers. Yeah. So the result of that is each one of these little systems is run by one person and the dog, and when the person's in the pub, it's the dog. There is no money to innovate, there is no time to innovate, there is no skill to innovate, there is only interest in doing what they've already done, because that's what they know. One of the things you can talk about financing structures all you like. Orange County is a big water district. It's actually relatively unusual. Yeah. You have to think about that proverbial long tail. If you're going to get innovation across the water sector, it seems to me you have to think about that long tail and how to consolidate that.
Mike, did you want to talk about that?
Oh, I totally agree with you. I think there are far too many special districts, and there is a need to consolidate. We'd have tremendous economies of scale in doing so. I think you'll hear the argument that they like to have local control. Well, you're not giving up that much local control if you consolidate a few of them into a little larger geographic area. The one thing also is I don't see any reason why you shouldn't have wastewater and water agencies consolidated. To have a water agency overseeing perhaps a county. Because there again, we need to start looking holistically at water, whether it's wastewater or whether it's groundwater or whether we're purifying wastewater to make water pure enough to put back into the ground. So yeah, I definitely think we need to change our thinking about that.
If I could just add really quickly on that, I mean, I do think that fragmentation, both geographically and also by function, is a serious obstacle to new innovation in the water area. There are various ways of dealing with it. I think one is to imagine having more agencies like the Orange County Water District or like the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California that bring together multiple agencies and permit them to think more broadly. And then the other reason why we suggested having an Office of Water Innovation at the state level was the notion that it could act as a consolidator and actually have each of the individual water suppliers serve as investors in that particular office or stakeholders in that office, and then you could have a statewide office that would actually look at some of these innovations, test them, and get the information out. Very much like EPRI. Those of you who are involved in the energy area know that the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, plays a major role as a major researcher for the energy industry. We need an EPRI basically for water, and having a statewide water office might serve that function.
Yeah, I totally agree with Buzz and your comment there that the smaller agencies don't have the time or the money to devote to innovation. So having a state department like that would be terrific. There are also some other examples that exist today that could be used more fully. So one of the great examples and success stories really is Imagine H2O, which is Tammann's organization that he founded. So 1 out of 6 venture dollars actually goes through, or 2 companies that have come out of that program, which WaterSmart is one, so that's great. There are also some other agencies and organizations that do a lot of innovation, take the burden off the small agencies like the American Water Works Association and the Water Research Foundation. There are also innovation clusters around water that EPA is supporting in Fresno, for example, in Austin, in Milwaukee. So those are some examples. One other one I want to mention, I just returned from Australia yesterday, and Southeast Water in Victoria actually has created its own innovation subsidiary called IOTA. So they're out looking for new technologies and testing them separate from and outside the operations of that utility, which I think is a really innovative model. It takes away sort of the low-risk mentality that's within the operations of the utility and puts it aside into a higher risk, new technology, new innovation segment of the utility. I think that's an interesting example to look at.
I think one other thing is we need to try to encourage the private sector and the public sector to work together on new technologies. In other words, if the private sector comes up with a certain technology, they can use the public sector to help maybe implement it and test it for them to make sure that the results are what they think they should be. There again, an example, we're working with a company called Trevi on forward osmosis. which could be used to concentrate brine for recycled water, other applications. And we have a partnership. We applied for a grant. We got the grant together, and we'll be testing that system out. So there is an opportunity, I think, certainly for the public and the private sector to work together in that respect on technology.
Let's have another question. Yes, ma'am, way in the back.
Thank you. I'm actually from EPRI, and we work on the water energy nexus a lot. And one of the things I wanted to comment about the consolidation is sometimes there's talk about from the other point of view when you're looking at pumping, the energy perspective. So sometimes the perspective is to do the processing right at the local unit so that you don't have to pump the water back and forth. So that's one point to just look at, point of view. And we have worked with some of the water research related organizations, like Water Research Foundation, which is sort of EPRI, but for the water sector. So that's another organization I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm glad you did that because I'm the president of Water Reuse California, and I would have been remiss not to have mentioned them.
Question? Yes, sir, here.
The last forum, and also in the last forum, a question came up about water transportation through pipelines. And I think one of the questions was, or one of the statements was that the age of major government-sponsored infrastructure is over. No more big dams, no more major innovations or infrastructure improvements of that nature. Seems to me like water transport that could possibly come from maybe Washington and Oregon or possibly other sources is just as important as rural electrification, as railroads, or as other major infrastructures that the government has sponsored and funded. So is the government now incapable of doing any infrastructure development that's critical to the development of the country?
Oh, well, I'll jump on the infrastructure point more broadly and just say that I think that the concept of what happens to a drop of water and where can you take that drop of water from its existing source to where it is beneficially used is the right way of thinking about things, but there's so much opportunity for improvement within existing pipelines, within one utility system, to reduce leakage and waste, and even on the sewer side, sewer overflows and intrusion from when it rains, the storm water that creates all sorts of problems in the system, that I think there's a far better opportunity to improve our water and sewer systems thinking that way than thinking about how to transport water from very far away to a place where it can be used.
The other, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, just in the state of California, moving water from Northern California to Southern California takes a tremendous amount of energy.
Because it's necessary.
Well, but there's other ways. Water recycling, as an example, uses half the energy that it takes to move water from the north to the south. So just to follow up on the point that was previously made, I think we have to look for that local water supply reliability, and that's what we as water managers are doing in the state of California.
And just one more thought on that is, in order to make any of this happen, in order to get innovation disseminated, someone has to want to buy it in one form or another. And this problem of pipes and transportation is one where there is an additional value proposition to doing things right, which is when water gets out of the pipe that it's supposed to be in, there are problems. There's a huge industry, a private industry around remediation of leaks and leak detection, both on the water and the wastewater side. So there is some financial and private market incentive to improve our existing infrastructure without relying on government to do it all. And part of the reason that that's so important is half the mileage of most cities occurs on private land. It's underneath your yard, the pipe that takes the city pipe to your house and back, which the city usually doesn't have any control over.
So I'll just add a little bit more.
Well, let's just take one or two more questions just to give folks a chance. I think ma'am over here on the far left, my far left.
In looking at the future of water infrastructure, we've been talking about pipes and big dams. Technology brings in a whole new set of possibilities around on-site technology and local systems that are remote monitored. Where do you see that fitting into the picture? The finance is completely different if you talk about it that way.
Yeah. So I'll just say, I think we are moving, just as in the energy area, in a direction towards more distributed water development and water supply. One of the questions from the woman from EPRI a moment ago dealt with actually having to move the water around for recycling purposes. Frequently, recycling plants are built at the lowest possible point of a city, because historically that's where you collected your wastewater and you got rid of your wastewater. And so that means that we actually collect all of this wastewater at this one point, and then we have to pump it back out again, frequently uphill to all the people who are utilizing it. It will probably make a lot more sense in the future to have smaller recycling facilities that might be neighborhood-based, where you don't have to worry about pumping the water all over the city again, and so that you are reducing your overall energy costs. And I think that's just one other really important point when we think about new innovations in the water field, which is that water-energy nexus. More and more we are having to think not only about the water implications of what we are doing, but also the energy implications of our water technology.
Yes, sir.
Dan Lashoff. There's been a lot of discussion about pricing and the role that that would have in stimulating innovation, and we've been talking about lessons from the energy sector, and I'm afraid that there's another lesson from the energy sector that we haven't talked as much about, which is that pricing is important, but it's not enough in a lot of these cases. And Professor Thompson's paper talks about regulation, and I'm wondering if we can have a little bit more discussion, because if we look at major energy innovations, dropping in the cost of solar power, energy efficiency, pricing played some role there, but the big private-owned utilities played a minor role. Smart performance-based regulation played the dominant role. And where are the opportunities for innovation in regulation in the water sector?
Buzz, you might want to take that, because that's the second one of your 3 recommendations.
Yeah, again, I think that one of the things that we saw is that you don't have, except in the area of clean water, you don't have the same type of regulatory drivers in the water field that you do in the energy area. There are some state laws around the United States that have pushed for the use of recycling, either by requiring, for example, new public buildings to have it be plumbed for recycled water, or that ban the use of fresh water for various purposes like golf courses. I think we could be doing a lot more to think about how we could establish performance-based regulations, just like you suggested, that actually would push new technology. In addition to that, the other problem is that frequently you have a lot of regulations at the local level which vary tremendously from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction on, for example, recycling, that require new technologies to actually have to meet different regulatory requirements in different jurisdictions, and that just makes it a lot more difficult to move that technology out.
One of the performance standards that was instrumental in getting water smart software off the ground was actually the state of California's standard of achieving a 20% reduction in efficiency or in consumption, and that's been renewed by Governor Brown. Thank you for that. And I think we have to think beyond 2020. Maybe we should have a 30% goal by 2030, which I think is completely reasonable. When we look at what Australia did, they've reduced demand permanently by 43% during their 14-year millennium drought. Now, so I think 20% is achievable. We've shown that it is. We can go beyond it. So I also want to talk about pricing structure, which we talked about raising prices, but not about rate structures. And I think that we should be at least doing tiered rates today, and we can even go beyond that to think about allocation-based rates, where we actually apply a water rate on each individual customer that's customized to their particular water use. And that's been happening in Orange County very successfully over the last 20 years.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our panel. I want to thank our panelists who did a great job.